Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for being here. The third night of our series. Before we start, let's say a prayer. We'll say the Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. I want to thank the Respect Life Ministry for help promoting this. I also want to thank Michael, one of our Faith in Action kids, who is here supporting the program. And he'll be doing our review for he's a confirmandes. He'll be getting his confirmation this year. He'll be confirmed this year. So anyway, I also want to put a shout out to his mom, who owns Word of Mouth Catering and provided the food in the back that's been there for the series. There's a little business card there by the pumpkin if you want to grab one. She's been a lifesaver for me. Okay, so tonight, as part of our Mercy Triumphs Over Judgment series, we have Mary Forr. She's now Director of Life Issues for the Archdiocese of Washington, and her title for the talk tonight is People with Disabilities, Beloved of Our Creator. Mary Forr is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, where she majored in political science and philosophy. After graduation, Mary received her master's in education from Notre Dame through the Alliance for Catholic Education. She has taught high school and middle school and founded a nonprofit called Teaching Together that works to provide jobs for adults with special needs in Catholic schools. I hope we hear about that. In 2016, Mary became the Director of Life Issues for the Archdiocese of Washington, where she currently works to provide educational, public policy, and catechetical materials surrounding the life issues. Please welcome Mary Forr.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. When I was 19 years old, I volunteered at the Special Olympics State Games in State College, Pennsylvania. I volunteered in the skills division of tennis. Athletes hit forehands, backhands, serves, and volleys. One after the next, they made their way through the line. I congratulated each of them as they passed. And each athlete beamed with pride. One athlete, named Ben, finally came up. I asked Ben if he needed any practice rounds, and he confidently replied, "No, I'm ready," and made some joke to the other volunteer about why I would ask such a silly question. Ben did really well at all of his drills, and when he finished, I said to him, "Hey Ben, that was an awesome job. You're really good." He looked up at me, and he smiled, and he said, "I know I'm good. I'm perfect." Ben had Down syndrome. We live in a world where everyone is evaluated by his or her abilities. We walk in a room, and sometimes we look around not really seeing people for who they are, but instead seeing what people look like, what they wear, and what they can or cannot do. We constantly think of ways to improve ourselves physically, professionally, and intellectually. When I was working at a home for children who are blind and visually impaired, a little girl named Kayla pointed this out to me. Kayla was completely blind, and she had been since birth. Like most 13-year-olds, she went to summer camp looking to find true love. Kayla's love interest was a little boy named Sam. Sam was also 13. Sam was also visually impaired, though he was not completely blind, and Kayla was. All throughout the week, the two of them walked around hand in hand and could never be separated. It seemed like everything was going great. Well, on Friday night, we held a talent show. And at the talent show, Kayla sang the song, "Why Does Love Always Feel Like a Battlefield?" And Sam sang the song, "How could you be so heartless?" And it didn't take a detective to figure out that perhaps there was a little bit of trouble in paradise. My suspicions were confirmed as I helped a not-so-happy Kayla to get ready for bed. After lots of huffing, Kayla finally decided she was ready to tell me what was wrong. She said to me, "You know what, Mary? I wish that everyone was blind." I was ready to tell her she didn't really mean that, but Kayla cut me off and she said, "Because if everyone was blind, people would like you for who you are, not for what you look like, or what you wear, or what you can do." I couldn't help but think that she had a point. So often we place so much value on the things a person can do, or on the way a person looks. But at times, we fail to remember that people have value simply because they are. Not because they're runners, or lawyers, or geniuses. This mentality of placing value on a person's ability, or on the exterior, is at the heart of the relationship between the pro-life movement and people with disabilities. It's a dangerous mentality, and it puts the lives of individuals with various forms of disabilities at great risk. When we evaluate a person based on their capability, it leads us to a society that shuns those whose abilities aren't the norm. Unfortunately, for thousands of years, there has been a war on people with disabilities. And though we would like to think that our society has become more and more refined and cultured over time, Pope St. John Paul the Great, who said, "A society will be judged on how it treats its most vulnerable," would have to disagree. Throughout history, individuals with disabilities have been treated as less than human. In 340 BC, Aristotle declared, "Let there be a law that no deformed child shall live." The child was seen as a burden on the community, and his death was viewed as a greater benefit than his life. In ancient Rome, a city praised for its great civilization, babies born with disabilities were simply tossed into the Tiber River. In Sparta, a city-state where military strength was prized, there was a law that a disabled infant must be thrown over a cliff by their father immediately after their birth. There is a reason why it was so shocking to everyone that Jesus chose to associate with people with disabilities. These people were seen as outcasts, as sinners, but Christ welcomed them. Unfortunately, after his death, people did not see people with disabilities as our neighbor. Following the death of Christ, living conditions for individuals with disabilities were still extremely difficult. They relied on charity to survive. Early in the 20th century, we saw the rise in the eugenics movement aimed at eliminating individuals with disabilities. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, opened her first clinic in 1916. In her own words, Sanger's mission was, quote, "to apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is already tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring." End quote. The founder of the largest abortion provider in America began with the idea of ridding the world of people with disabilities. In 1927, Buck v. Bell allowed the sterilization of individuals based on intellectual disabilities. And in 1939, Adolf Hitler issued an order stating persons who are incurable can be accorded a mercy death. This order, codenamed Acton T4, was targeted at children under the age of 3. However, it quickly expanded to encompass others. Today, individuals with disabilities are still being discriminated against. It's just this time this discrimination is disguised with the language of rights and choice. The right to choose, the right to die, and the right to have a child are just a few. Each of these rights discriminates against individuals with disabilities, and the expansion of these rights will lead to broader discriminations against them. Because unfortunately, the majority of society does not believe that Ben is perfect. While women choose to have abortions for a number of reasons, Americans would be outraged if doctors consistently recommended that mothers abort babies of a certain ethnicity or gender, and rightly so, as this would be discrimination. However, doctors consistently recommend that mothers abort babies like Ben with disabilities. Their death is viewed as a better option than their life. In America, 80 to 90% of children who receive a prenatal diagnosis of disability are aborted. Around the world, the situation is much worse. The New England Journal of Medicine published an article not only admitting to infanticide in the Netherlands, but actually advocating for it. A case was noted in Amsterdam where a child with Down syndrome developed a bowel obstruction. Although this obstruction could have easily been surgically corrected, it proved fatal for the baby, whose parents refused the surgery. The courts refused to intervene, saying the child would have had a miserable life anyway. In the Netherlands, the situation has only gotten worse. At Groningen University Hospital, doctors are euthanizing children under the age of 12 who are diagnosed with incurable illness or intolerable suffering. You may think this couldn't happen in America, but similar cases have in fact happened. In 1982, in Bloomington, Indiana, baby Joe was born with a blockage of the esophagus. This child was also born with Down syndrome. Although the blockage could have easily been corrected through surgery, the parents decided not to have the surgery and instead to allow this child to starve to death. When news of this case became public, many families offered to adopt this child. President Reagan even tried to intervene. However, the child's parents refused, and the Supreme Court of Indiana affirmed the parents' decision, and the child died before the U.S. Supreme Court could rule. Just as frightening is the fact that some of the most prominent intellectuals are advocating these very measures. So-called ethicist Peter Singer of Princeton University openly endorses the murder of disabled children. A few years ago, he suggested that a period of 28 days after birth might be allowed before the infant is accepted as having the same right to live as others. Today, though he no longer uses the 28 days as a frame of reference, he still endorses the murder of babies with profound disabilities. In an interview with Prism magazine, James Watson, the discoverer of the genetic code, stated, "If a child were not declared alive until 3 days after birth, then all parents would be allowed the choice. The doctor could allow the child to die and save everyone a lot of misery and suffering." Individuals with disabilities are not just targeted in their mother's womb, but they are arguably the only group of people whose development we try to prevent before they are even in their mother's womb. The media is filled with advertisements for fertility clinics proclaiming that every couple has the right to a child. During the process of IVF, individuals with disabilities are discriminated against multiple times. First, fertilized eggs are screened for disabilities before implantation. Those that show any sign of a genetic defect are simply discarded. Second, multiple zygotes are implanted, and all are monitored during the pregnancy. Frequently, doctors recommend that a mother selectively reduce the number of zygotes she's carrying to give one zygote a better chance. This means that the mother will abort any child that looks like it may have a chance of having a disability, in favor of increasing the odds that another child be born without a disability. Once again, individuals with disabilities face discrimination, challenging their very right to live. As more and more parents conceive through artificial means, fewer children with disabilities will be born because their lives are not as valued. And not shockingly, life outside the womb is still threatening for individuals with disabilities. As assisted suicide legislation spreads throughout the country, the lives of individuals with disabilities become more and more perilous. In November of 2016, the D.C. City Council voted 11-2 that assisted suicide should be legalized in Washington, D.C. This legislation, this new so-called right, specifically targets individuals with disabilities. Though Compassionate Choices, the group who promotes assisted suicide, began by claiming that people need the right to assisted suicide so they could avoid pain, the reality of why people choose assisted suicide is actually very different. The 5 most common reasons individuals choose assisted suicide are loss of autonomy, decreasing ability to participate in activities that made life enjoyable, loss of dignity, loss of control of bodily functions, and feeling like a burden on family and friends. All of these issues are issues that individuals with disabilities face every single day. And so disabilities groups are some of the staunchest opponents of assisted suicide legislation. When laws state that patients who previously have not faced these challenges through life should be aided in killing themselves, it becomes impossible to recognize the value of individuals with disabilities who face these challenges every day. It becomes the norm for people to understand why someone going through these challenges would want to die. Whether it intends to or not, it causes society to make quality of life judgments based on ability. My favorite sister, Marita, is someone I couldn't help thinking about as I stood waiting for the ruling on assisted suicide. Marita has multiple special needs, and she is full of joy and innocence. And when she's around, life is just way more fun. So in honor of Marita, we're going to take a small break from the heaviness of this talk and play a little game where I tell you about her favorite activity, her play. So for this game, you're going to need to be seated next to someone. So if you wouldn't mind just moving over here. And then if our folks in the back, if we could have... Okay, so if you wouldn't mind moving over, that would be great. Just for the game. Okay, so for the game, one person is going to have their hand out like this, and the other is going to put their pointer finger in the hand of the other person. So if everyone puts their right hand like this, their right hand like this, and their left hand like this. So you got off easy. Okay, so each time I say the word play, the person whose finger is like this is going to try to pull their finger up, and the other person is going to try to catch the finger. Okay, so let's practice. Play. No one's too old to play. Okay, so fingers back. Here we go. I think it's very important to play every once in a while. Each summer, my older sister Marita writes a performance for us to play at the beach. During the performance, every member of our family, all 26 of us, ranging from 72 to 1, plays along. We all pretend that we are actors for the night, and we dress up in costumes and put on accents and perform the performance for the audience, which consists of my parents, who are the only ones who care about the play. I have come to realize that this performance is the pinnacle of our summer vacation. It's the chance that every adult gets to once again play and remember what it was like to be a kid. It's in being like children that we find we are able to enjoy life more. So play each day. Okay. This talk is a little heavy, so it's fun to break it up. My older sister Marita is without a doubt the best part of my family. You just have to ask anyone who meets her or meets the rest of us. She's by far more fun than any of us. If you ask Marita about her life, most of the time she would say she loves it. Some of the time she would acknowledge that it's difficult. One of the major challenges that Marita faces is that she is able to compare herself to others. She recognizes that she doesn't run the same way that my brother and I do. She's embarrassed when she can't tie her shoes or cut her food, and even more embarrassed if at night she wets the bed. But Marita lives in a community that loves and values her. As assisted suicide becomes more and more prevalent, people will begin to see people like Marita as having less value. The Netherlands now provides assisted suicide to perfectly healthy individuals with disabilities if they can demonstrate that they have unbearable suffering. But what is unbearable suffering? If LeBron James, a famous basketball player, were suddenly going through the worst depression that anyone could ever imagine, wouldn't this be unbearable suffering? But at the same time, wouldn't his fans everywhere do anything possible to help support him? Wouldn't they be clamoring to find the very best therapist or to reassure him that he is loved and wanted? I'm sure we would see advertisements saying how great LeBron is, or see things on Facebook telling people to send letters of support. Why then, when someone with a disability says they have unbearable suffering, are countries that have legalized assisted suicide providing them with the means to end their lives? When twin brothers from Belgium, who were born deaf, found out that they would soon perhaps go blind, they asked to commit assisted suicide. No one stepped in to tell them how valuable their lives were. In fact, their families assisted in the process. When Daniel James, a 23-year-old who was paralyzed during a rugby game, wanted to kill himself, his parents helped him to end what they called his second-class existence. Why was his existence second class? Why didn't anyone care enough to tell him, no, I want to be here with you. I know this is going to be hard, but I'll be there. We can't pretend that it's because we want everyone to have a choice, because if it were LeBron James, people would certainly step in. The only honest answer is that society has come to a point where at times they're okay with discriminating against people with disabilities. They can understand why someone with a disability would want to think about assisted suicide. And isn't that so sad? Instead of valuing the gift of that life, we're seeing a struggle where someone else may see joy. To someone born with a genetic condition that makes tying their shoes difficult, we're saying, you have less dignity. Simply because you can't tie your shoe? How does that make sense? Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, says, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." We need to reassure every single person, not just fully abled persons, that there is a why. And yes, we need to validate that it may be difficult, but we need to affirm that there is a why that will certainly allow them to bear any how. We need to show that we want there to be places where their gifts can be used. And this is why I founded the Teaching Together program, which helps adults with special needs find jobs in Catholic schools. This program is really unique in that it benefits everyone involved: the students, the teachers, the community, and the adult with special needs. The gifts of the individuals with disabilities are put on display in a way that they aren't in other places. They're able to use their talents to do a number of jobs that oftentimes teachers describe as really frustrating tasks to do. One of our teacher's aides with disabilities does the bulletin board every week, and the teacher that she assists says that she absolutely hates doing bulletin boards. And Alex loves it. It's a perfect match. That goes on everywhere. One of our third graders remarked about her teacher's aide, Miss Royals. She said, "You know, when I don't understand how to do something and the teacher can't explain it too well, I just go ask Miss Royals. Sometimes she says it a little more slowly, and that helps me to get it." Those are gifts that these people have to share. And they're gifts that we need to allow them to share, because the body of Christ is not complete unless each person has a place where he or she feels like they are able to share their gifts with others. If assisted suicide is legalized throughout the United States, individuals with disabilities won't just face the challenge of their lives being seen as less dignified. They won't just face the challenge of it being more difficult to find jobs where they can use their gifts and talents, but they will also face financial pressure to end their lives. Assisted suicide pills generally cost about $500. This is significantly less than the cost of my sister's medical expenses. It's much less than the cost of keeping a person with MS alive. It's much less than the cost of keeping a person with Down syndrome alive. As the financial advantages of promoting assisted suicide are recognized, individuals with disabilities will face even more discrimination. Their lives will be seen as burdensome and costly. Research into improving their lives will decrease, and once again, the right of individuals with disabilities to live will be questioned. When I think of the financial pressures on people to commit assisted suicide, I think of my friend Katie. Katie was the manager of the Notre Dame women's basketball team, and she was in charge of summer camps at Notre Dame. I played college basketball for the University of Notre Dame, so I had the opportunity to work and spend time with Katie. You couldn't find a happier, sweeter, or kinder girl anywhere. After graduation from college, Katie became the director of women's basketball operations at Notre Dame, which is a pretty big deal. They're typically in the running for the national championship each year. So that job is a really coveted one. And it would typically go to someone who had a lot more experience. But Katie was just so awesome that she was immediately given the job. Unfortunately, on June 8th, 2014, Katie, a type 1 diabetic, had an insulin pump malfunction. She was found unconscious and seizing. Despite efforts to help her, Katie has not regained full consciousness since this event. This once vibrant, smart, successful, faithful young woman is now unable to talk, unable to move, and unable to even let others in the room know that she can hear them. And yet, she's changing lives. when Katie's brother, my close friend Ryan, called me on June 8th. I happened to be in a planning period during my day of teaching. I picked up the phone, and he told me what happened. Immediately in the period following, I asked my students if they would pray for Katie. I told them about her and told them the story of what happened. Immediately, 60-some students became my prayer warriors. I've since stopped teaching, but this past year, one of my students sent me an email. She wanted to know if I would like to read her high school entrance essay. She wrote it about Katie. She wrote how I told them about Katie, and she said, "That night, as I said my prayers, I remembered Katie Schwab. Without hesitating, I told God, I want to be like her because she's a kind, compassionate woman who is strong and faithful. Even though I didn't know her, I felt an unbreakable, real connection with her. I think God gave me that connection for a reason. I could be like Katie Schwab in a way that no one had before. I had a new realization that everything I had was a gift. My heart beating was a miracle. My eyes to see the morning sun were a miracle. My ears to hear the birds chirping, a miracle. My feet to feel the moist soil between my toes was a miracle." This past year, the student's mom sent me a text message asking for Katie's address. A year later, her daughter, for her birthday present, asked if she could meet her hero, Katie. So incredible. A few weeks ago, her mom sent me a text message saying that the drive leading up to Holy Child High School has been renamed Katie Schwab Drive. She said that none of the students there, other than Riley, have ever met Katie. None of them know anything about Katie, but all of them know who she is now, and all of them pray for her. She is changing their lives, and she lives thousands of miles away. Katie is the type of person who is threatened by assisted suicide. To some, her life may seem to have no meaning, but to others, like Riley and God, her life is miraculous. Katie's family completely rearranged their lives when Katie became sick. They moved across the country to be with Katie. And on a bright spot in all of this, her older sister, because she moved to South Bend to help take care of Katie, met her husband. And her older brother, because he moved to South Bend to be with Katie, met his wife. She's incredible. She's bringing people together everywhere. Her care is costly, and the benefits from it are not always visible. But still, Katie's life has worth. A creature created in the image and likeness of the Creator. A being with such great value that the divine became one with him by taking human form. Because of our lack of understanding, our society places immense value on all of the wrong things: money, prestige, intellect, talent, looks. But thankfully, each of us has the opportunity to change that. Each of us has the opportunity to be an extra voice for the vulnerable who are under attack. Each of us has the opportunity to fight for something that's truly worth fighting for. The belief that, as Pope Benedict said, every being is loved. And whatever happens, every being is awaited by love. And so, life is good. Thank you all so much for having me tonight. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Katie. Beautiful, beautiful testimony.
Wow. Are fewer Down syndrome children being born today?
Yes. So in the United States, if you're conceived with Down syndrome, doctors recommend that all women over the age of 35 receive special testing when they get pregnant. And of those women, 90% of the ones who are prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome are aborted. So you have a 10% chance of making it to birth if you're prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome.
He used to wait for the amniocentesis, and the baby was 5 months along, and then they would, the mother would given the option of aborting the baby when the baby could live outside the womb.
Yeah.
So I don't think they do the amniocentesis anymore because they have the gene and everything. So.
Yeah, it's incredible the number of tests that they're able to do. It's also amazing. A close friend of mine, her water broke at 15 weeks, and the doctors said that she would certainly miscarry, but the doctors didn't know that she had already consecrated this baby to the Blessed Mother, and the child's name was going to be Diego. And she said, the Blessed Mother's taking care of this baby. He's not going to die. She went back to the doctor a few weeks later. The doctor said, I don't know how to explain this, but there's actually more fluid there now than there was before your water broke. And she made it she got to 22 weeks, and the doctor said, at 22 weeks now, the child is viable. So it's that early. It's just over halfway through pregnancy. And it was incredible to see the difference in the treatment of her child from 21 weeks and 5 days to 22 weeks. At 22 weeks, the child was given, they were giving the child steroids, they were monitoring the mother 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they had the mom in a hospital, and at 21 weeks and 5 days, she was just sort of left on her own. But she was told that little Diego would have all sorts of disabilities from her water breaking at 15 weeks. He was born at 32 weeks, and he's a perfectly healthy little boy now. So it's really incredible.
Katie, when you were talking about what's happening in the Netherlands, I think maybe in Canada too?
Yeah, Canada has assisted suicide.
And you say, when is this going to happen? When the laws is going to be legalized? It's just inevitable, it seems.
Well, it seemed that way until recently. So there have been some big wins against assisted suicide. Last year, 38 states had active legislation attempting to legalize assisted suicide. And this year so far, only 21 states have active legislation. So we are making progress. Unfortunately, the most recent ballot initiatives have overwhelmingly voted to legalize assisted suicide, like the ballot initiative in Colorado. And then here in DC, of course, the vote was 11-2 on that. And that was very sad. It was a number of Catholics are on DC City Council, and they all but one of the Catholics on City Council voted in favor of it. One even saying that it was his faith that compelled him to vote in favor of assisted suicide. Just really, it's really, John Paul II called it misguided mercy, and that's exactly what it is.
So how many states allow?
Right now it's New Hampshire, Montana, Oregon, Washington, New Hampshire, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, California, Washington, D.C., and that's it.
So
This is Oregon in there?
And Oregon, yes, thank you.
last year you said 38 tried, so most of them failed it.
Right, it failed almost everywhere. Yeah, and what the great thing about the movement against assisted suicide, it's really a nonpartisan movement. It spans all political ties. So there are There are, the people who are traditionally pro-life, who are opposed to assisted suicide. But then there are people who are traditionally not pro-life, who are very opposed to assisted suicide. And then there are people who believe in assisted suicide on principle, but they don't believe that legalizing it is a good thing. So it's really a broad spectrum of people who oppose it. And the disabilities groups really lead the charge in that. Yes?
I'm a hospice nurse. I'm retired, and there's something very, very different when you put somebody on pain management because the cancer's eating them alive,
right,
than putting them to sleep. But when you have that morphine and you allow, you have a drip and you allow the patient to push the button, the family is not allowed to push that button, And what happens eventually is the patient, when they're dying, they're not hungry, they have a little bit of thirst. So what happens is their kidneys fail, and then all those natural poisons that we consider poisons become a natural sedative. And then they'll die of renal failure, and then also the morphine is given too to help them with their breathing because they're
right.
And you give them a little oxygen, and
right.
And then when they die in comfort. But that, when they stop breathing, you don't give them the Narcan to bring them back. You let them go in peace. That's
right.
Very different than giving them a IV and putting them under,
right,
to sleep.
Right. And Maryland's very proud of how good their hospice care is here, or their palliative care as well.
Well, there's palliative
and
hospice for pain.
management. Right.
And hospice can be palliative, but it can be other things too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in states where they legalize assisted suicide, the level of hospice care actually decreases instead of increases.
And the other thing is if somebody wants to kill themselves, they can just take an overdose of their Percocet. They don't need to go to a doctor to get that pills. They can, if they want to, just overdose on pills they already have for pain. You see what I'm saying?
Right, and that's the argument that a lot of groups make against assisted suicide.
We should be helping them see their worth, you see.
Right.
We don't.
And we need to do a better job with mental health towards the end of life, where you find out you have 6 months left to live. Well, of course if you're a young person who was expecting to live much longer, of course you start to fall into depression. But we don't do a great job of doing screenings for depression at that time. So when a person requests the assisted suicide measures, they may actually be depressed, and we need to work on that. Yes?
I never cease to be amazed that the people you describe that are now going in for suicide, assisted suicide, and make it look like it's something very merciful, to do, are the same people who will call a President Trump a Nazi. But let me tell you from experience, it was the Nazis in 1939, like you said, that started concentration camps to kill mentally retarded, those with disabilities, and German soldiers that were coming back from the war mutilated. Okay? And all you know what happened to those concentration camps a few years later.
Yeah.
6 million Jews, non-persons, were put to death. So it's funny how the ones who call this guy a Nazi are doing exactly what the Nazis did, 75 years ago.
Well, and it's really frightening in European countries right now. It is.
Yes, European countries, yeah.
They
should know better because
they really should.
The brutality
Yeah.
when the Nazis came in there.
Yeah, they really should. And there are some countries where 9-year-olds are being euthanized, which is it just seems absurd to think of. And here, well, in Maryland specifically, lawmakers, anytime that someone draws a comparison to what the Nazis were doing, lawmakers completely shut down. And they say, oh, no, we could never. That would never happen here. It would never happen, right? But you're right, they are. It's, and it's interesting how the fact that like the state governments see themselves as completely unable. They're not able to connect the fact that some of the things they do are as evil as some of the things that have happened throughout history. And so lobbyists, when they come in, have to sort of work around that in a way. And so lobbyists are not able to say things like, hey, you're doing exactly what the Nazis were doing, or you're legalizing what the Nazis had. Because when the lobbyist says that, the lawmaker just dismisses it as if it's crazy. So instead, the lobbyists have to say things like, well, you do realize that this would be discrimination against this group. And that's language that they'll listen to. But they're completely unable to see any connection between themselves and these horrific events that have happened throughout history, which of course, you know, is how we end up repeating terrible things.
I mean, what is the difference between sending or euthanizing a 9-year-old or sending him to a gas chamber?
Right, yeah. Both ways the child ends up dead. Yeah.
And yet there are Catholic politicians in this country that, you know, support all that kind of thing.
Right. And it's been interesting up in Massachusetts, assisted suicide. There was a huge battle against assisted suicide there, and the proponents of assisted suicide were actually winning, and it looked like assisted suicide was going to pass there. And then the Kennedy family came out and said, hey, this actually goes against what we have been trying to do with universal health care. And once they said something against assisted suicide, the tide completely shifted. And the newspaper there came out, the editorial board came out against it. So it's interesting, in the blue states, we really do need Democrats coming out strongly against it. And in the red states, we really need Republicans coming out strongly against it. But the great thing so far with assisted suicide is that we have had that. We have had both Democrats and Republicans recognizing, hey, this is really bad, right? And we hope it stays that way.
That's why I said it's too bad the Catholic politicians
exactly
come out and say that.
Right,
whether they're
right.
Democrat or Republican.
Right. And with the DC bill, there was a major struggle with that, where it was difficult. You know, we had Catholics. Well, DC is a little different, but we had a number of Catholics who voted in favor of it, saying that their faith compelled them to. And it's interesting, all of the politicians who talked on assisted suicide, when they voted in favor of it, they all talked about the death of a family member. But none of them talked about the pain that their family member went through. They all talked about how difficult it was for them to watch it. And so they were all saying, no one should have to watch someone die this way. No one should have to go through being with someone as they die this way. And at some point, one of our disabilities advocates said, so is this law to protect you, or is it to protect the person who's dying? You know, are you looking at this law for the caregiver or for the person who's dying? Because it seems like you're looking at it for an easy way out for the caregiver, instead of people stepping up and saying, hey, you took care of me my whole life. Maybe it's time for me to step up and return the favor.
Well, you have to, in hospice, when you have, this is hospice, not palliative. Because palliative, they can be a full code. Hospice, they're a DNR, do not resuscitate. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference there. But you are taking care of the family in that room as they support this person who is dying. So you help them get whatever need they need. If they need to have a rabbi come in, you will assist them to have the rabbi come in, or the pastor, or whatever whatever they need, if they need a little tray with coffee and stuff to eat,
Right.
and need the kids to come in, you allow all of that,
Right. Yeah.
you know?
Well,
Supporting them, because that person is dying.
yeah.
And they are comfortable, you keep them comfortable, and you're turning them and stuff, but you're taking care of the family, and that's very important.
And that is one of the really beautiful things about hospice care. It's interesting for families with people with disabilities. It would be nice if there were that type of support throughout life, right? Like there's all these efforts. Iceland said that they cured Down syndrome. Well, they didn't cure it. They just aborted off the children who had it. Even a Kaiser Permanente study from California said that they were reducing cases of cystic fibrosis. Again, they weren't reducing cases. They were aborting 7 out of 8 children prenatally diagnosed with it. And so there's this misconception that a problem is being solved, when really it's just being eliminated. And so the families who have people in their family with a disability, they're becoming more and more outcasts, right? Because there's not that community of loving support. There's not 5 or 6 people in the parish who have a child with Down syndrome around the same age. Instead, maybe there's 1 or 2. And, in a rural town like Altoona, where I'm from, my sister is the only person in our parish with an intellectual disability. And so that can be a very lonely place. And thankfully, we live in a really wonderful community that really embraces Marita, and she does all sorts of things. She's an usher, and she collects the money. She's in the choir. And there's some angels up there who help her make sure that she's reading the right line of words. But some people don't have that, and that can be very lonely for those parents.
To be honest with you, I think unless I fault the education system, because just like we have history, a requirement, okay, in the schools, if we put things as requirements, then we will have less ignorance, if I may say. Okay? Because then it requires us to feel more at peace in working with people with special needs. Huh?
Yeah.
Because how many times we see people bringing in their children into churches? Well, do they bring children into their churches?
Right.
Okay, we look, oh, noise. Okay, so what? You know what I'm saying? But again, that's because of ignorance.
Right.
But if we were to make this part of our education system from day one, from elementary, giving sensitivity training and just like we do service training, okay, not just to meet you're putting in counting you have 2 hours and the people are kids just counting the time that they're doing it, versus having meaning in why we're doing this. So teaching kids what the parents go through, being visible. Okay, so these things are very important. A requirement, of you go through a rotation of working with people with special needs. Then we have a little bit more understanding. How do you take care of an elderly parent?
Right.
Don't just face it when you have an elderly parent. Do these things as part of an education system. Then we will become. That becomes part of our education system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right now we're just throwing big words. Oh, this is politics. Okay, so we don't discuss politics in ministries.
Right.
We don't discuss. Says who?
Right. Yeah.
All of these things. So I don't know. That's just my. I came into understanding of the disabilities. Initially, I was really avoiding that altogether. I would look at people who have special needs or people who are poor, and I would be crying. And just like I didn't feel comfortable until God convicted me to want to work with this population.
Right.
And it has been the best thing that had ever happened in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I had one of my teammates in college. We were seniors, and I didn't make the basketball team my first 3 years. I got cut. But my senior year, I made it finally. And when I did, my family, they had been huge Notre Dame fans my whole life. And so they all came out to the games. And one of my teammates had gone to Catholic school from kindergarten all the way up till now her senior year of college. And after she met my sister, we were talking in the locker room, and she said, you know, your sister's the first person with special needs that I've ever met.
Really?
And I was shocked, because I have grown up, you know, volunteering at Special Olympics and doing things with people with disabilities all the time. And I said to her, how's that possible? And she said, well, I mean, I didn't have anyone in my family. I went to Catholic school, so we didn't have any people in my school, and I had just volunteered doing other stuff. And she said, but I feel like I really missed out, because Marita loves better than anyone I've ever met. And it's true, the second Marita sees someone, you're her best friend. You know, she meets you and immediately she likes you. I did just think how much sometimes our Catholic schools, and they are, especially here in the Archdiocese of Washington, there's a huge effort to have inclusion in our Catholic schools. We're making a huge push. The Catholic Coalition for Special Education does a really great job of creating an inclusive environment in our Catholic schools. But outside the Archdiocese of Washington, our Catholic schools don't have people with disabilities in them. And so there could be an instance where someone like Becca goes, 18 years through school and never meets a person with a disability.
It's
really sad.
System in Montgomery County for the kids that are grade school. I'm not talking about high school. They go to Resnick, and Resnick is a school that mainstreams the disabled, challenged kids, and they mainstream them with kids who don't have any disabilities. So that's a really good start. The county has a lot more money, so they can provide that extra aid that can be in there for like 2 or 3 kids,
right?
That have physical and mental disabilities. And it really helps the other kids to see that this person is really normal.
Yeah.
Normal's a dial on your dryer, right?
Right.
It's not people.
Right.
So.
And all that.
Good.
It is. And
they have the money to do that. Then when they go to high school, they are mainstreamed into a regular high school.
Which is wonderful. Yeah. And all of the education research shows that if you have an individual in a classroom with an intellectual disability, the learning in the classroom of every student increases. So it's actually better for your academically gifted student. It's actually better for that student to also be in a classroom with a child with an intellectual disability. So there's really no excuse to not have someone in the classroom there. And with the Teaching Together program, we believe that I've seen the transformation that undergoes in a classroom when there's an adult with an intellectual disability there. We first started the program in Atlanta, Georgia, and at first the kids were scared. They had never interacted with someone with a disability before. By the end of the year, kids are high-fiving her as they walk in. They all were friends with her. They all talked to her. And she contributed so significantly in that for my student who had ADD, she would sit next to him during class, and each time he would start to look around the room, she'd say, "Hey, pay attention." And it was like okay, time to focus. And during tests, she would walk up and down those aisles. She would monitor to make sure no one was cheating. Boy, when she caught someone cheating, look out! You were shamed. But it was interesting, towards the middle of the year, one of my students made fun of another student for speaking a certain way. And he was making fun of this speech impediment that the other student had. And Miss Lonnie was in the classroom. She was our aide with disabilities. And she left, and another student turned to the first student who had just made fun of this boy and said to him, "How dare you? How dare you make fun of him for the way he speaks, when you can see the challenges that she faces every day, and you can see how hard she works to overcome them. How dare you make fun of another person for not being able to do something?" It was like, whew, okay, job well done, Miss Lonnie. You know, she had taught them, okay, we can't be basing people's worth on their ability to do something or not do it.
Two points that I think everybody should know. Okay, in employment, because I work in recruitment, it is so breathtaking to see individuals with disabilities work. Their work ethic is so phenomenal. They will work and work until you tell them to stop. So in repetitive positions, they do so well. You train them, and then they just do so many good things. That's number one. And then another thing that I found breathtaking. Okay, I'm involved in the pro-life movement, and I see a lot of families with special needs bringing the kids to the abortion clinics in front of like Dr. Carhart's clinic, and that really brought me to tears. Now that is again phenomenal, and the cars would look. You know, people who are driving up and down cut sight of the people with special needs. So I thought that was really nice, and they're actually praying the rosary and things like that. So that is so nice. So these are pointers as well.
Yeah. We'll have to find ways to bring this nonprofit here.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Would love to talk
So
about
it sounds to me like integration is really one of the keys.
Yeah. The more inclusive a community can be, the better it is for everyone, really. Even in the workplace, the studies show that if you have an individual with an intellectual or physical disability working in, the studies only studied specific settings, but in these settings where the studies were conducted, productivity in the workplace increases significantly when there's an individual with a disability there, and so does happiness, which I think everyone knows that instinctively, right? A kid with Down syndrome comes up and gives you a hug, and you can't help but be happy. You know, it's
and you have to remember, disability is also range. I mean, we have visual impairment, and if we just leave people to be only in programs where that disability is where you're able to compensate them. I'm using the not compensate. I'm not really thinking this straight. But where you give them support for their disability, okay, that's not good enough, because if you integrate them into the job market, okay, we have those Department of Rehabilitation Services that can work with these people, and there's so much funding that goes unutilized, and so just bring them in, and utilize the services, because they go unutilized.
Right.
I'm curious, are you involved in lobbying?
Not very involved, but a little bit every once in a while, and not through the Archdiocese of Washington. Well, sometimes through the Archdiocese of Washington a little bit, but separate from that for some disabilities issues.
Mary, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, those are beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. These are beautiful. Thank you.
Wonderful.